I'm going to invite you into some bravery today. I'm going to invite you, if you feel brave, I'm going to ask you some questions and you can raise your hand if you feel brave. If you're driving, don't do that. Both hands at 10 and 2. Wait, is it 4 and 7 now? 10 and 3, 9 and 3. Both hands at 9 and 3. I need to relearn how to drive. Both hands at 9 and 3 if you're driving. If you're in the chat, put in an emoji or a word as your version of raising your hand in community this day. Okay, are you ready? I'm going to ask you some questions. Okay. Only play along if you're feeling brave. You lose no points in this game for not playing. Okay. Raise your hand if you really do not enjoy watching the news, if that's really hard for you. Raise your hand if you do enjoy watching the news. A few of us. Raise your hand if you watch the news and you really do have that thing where it becomes a prayer request. You really see the news as a prayer request. Sometimes, for me, I think I can do one of these. Raise your hand if sometimes you feel a little bit of snarky, like, haha, when you watch the news of judgment. Yeah, sometimes that too. Okay, raise your hand if you love social media, like your Insta and your Facebook. Wow. Raise your hand if you do not get the appeal of social media. Raise your hand if you have taken the time to make your social media a safe place for you. Not comfortable. I didn't say comfortable. I said safe, right? Raise your hand if you need a second to think about what the difference between safe and comfortable is. Raise your hand if you're wondering where on earth Practitioner Shelley is going with this. Thank you, Molly. I knew you would raise your hand, Molly. Okay, here we go. Are you ready? Raise your hand if you feel brave and you choose to. Raise your hand if you are currently in or coming out of a difficult time in your life. It could be financially, it could be physically, it could be something in a relationship. Yeah. The interesting thing about that is many of you did one of these. I'm good, right? Sometimes it's hard for us to acknowledge that we are in or coming out of a hard place. And sometimes a hard place can be like the 5 minutes of this between my 2 youngest children this morning. And sometimes a hard place can be years of grief that we're walking through. You know, a hard place is relevant and it's relative to what we're going through in our lives, right? And it's different for all of us. Some of us are going through a hard place right now because of the political situation in our country. It makes us feel unsafe, right? And that's difficult for some of us. Some of us are going through a hard place because some of us go through chronic hard places. You know, there's just this one place in my life that I just struggle with. And some of us kind of go in and out of hard places, hard times in our life, right? The thing that I want you to really be aware of is that what we just did by taking a moment to raise our hand and acknowledge who we are and where we are in life, what we did together right there, even if it was this, that's my vulnerability dance today. Yeah, I'm going through it. What we did is we created safe space. We acknowledged for ourselves that we might be going through a thing, and what that did is it created a safe place for other people to do their vulnerability dance, right? So we created safe space. No spiritual bypass, no, it's all good. Just, yeah, I might be going through some things. And what we do when we acknowledge that together, without dwelling in it, there was no drama, right? It was just an acknowledgement. I'm going through something, or I've been going through something, right? Safe space. You did it. That was brave of you. I think it's important for us to be able to acknowledge where we're at and to take time to notice, oh, I'm in pain, or I'm worried, or I'm scared, or I'm coasting and I'm lacking it. I'm going to keep coasting, right? Our world doesn't seem to encourage this kind of introspection, and so it's our responsibility. We have to take it on ourselves to notice where we're at. And then there are those times when we get metaphorically run over by the struggle bus. You know, we know we're in pain. Roxana knows. We know we're in pain. We know we're hurting. We're pretty convinced the world stinks and so does everybody in it, right? Or maybe we get that diagnosis that makes our world just stutter to a halt before our eyes, right? I think many of us can relate to having those times in our lives, even if we're not in one right now. Looking back for me, there have been many of those times. Times when I didn't know how we were going to keep the lights on, you know, or times when a goodbye was way more final than I thought it was going to be. Yeah. There have been times in my life where I've felt unheard and unappreciated, you know, unbrave. Times when I lost a pregnancy, times when I lost a good friend, you know, times when I lost myself trying to help everybody else, you know. These are all times of loss. And all the time walking through these times, just because I have these times doesn't mean there's anything wrong. Somebody came up to me after a talk once and they said, oh, you're a practitioner and you give these inspirational talks and you struggle? I'm like, do I and how? Why, yes. Yeah, I struggle too, and that's okay. It doesn't make me any less connected to the divinity that I know is the core of my being, right? I still get to have the full human experience. You know, the really big time, the really big struggle, the really big one for me personally in my life so far here at the age of 50 was when our youngest was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, you know? That was the big one for us. God's calling to tell us about it. And through all of these life experiences, I've learned a few things, and I'd like to share a few things. And the first one is that the pain of these life experiences is really real. It's a real pain body that hurts to the touch, you know? It makes us do this because it hurts, and we need to protect ourselves from the pain, and that's okay. It's okay. When life happens and we think we're on our course and something happens and our course gets spun out, you know, it makes us, when the predictability of our life is in question, it can make us feel unsafe in the world. And it's okay in those moments to pull back, to center in, and to regroup, and to grieve the loss of what you thought it was going to look like. It's so important to grieve the loss of what you thought it was going to look like so that you can now move through the what is. So, the first thing I want you to know is that these experiences of life can be painful, and it's okay. It's okay. We're in it together. The other thing that I'd like to invite you into knowing this morning is that these things, these difficult times of life, they come and they come to pass. That is the nature of our life. Things come and they come to pass. All things come and they come to pass. Every life comes and it comes to pass. And it is part of the ebb and flow of life, and it's beautiful in its simplicity and in its grandeur. When we can become clear about the transient nature of the things of this world, you see, then we can become grounded and centered in the intransient nature of the love that is within us. When we begin to take our focus and our tethers from the things out here, we begin to tether in here. We find a true groundedness that is no longer dependent on our circumstances out here. Might come as a surprise to some of you who have known me for a while, and I suspect that it also won't. But I was in one of these painful times for about 7 years after we received our diagnosis for our wee lad of muscular dystrophy. And all the while that I was dealing with my thoughts and feelings about this really big thing, the RBT of my life, the really big thing, all the time that I was dealing with that here, life was happening at the speed of life here. My children were growing and changing, and so were their needs. My marriage was growing and changing, and so was its needs. This community was growing and changing, and so were your needs. And all the while, I could barely see my hand in front of my face because of the grief path that I was on. A couple of weeks ago, were you here when practitioner Sarah Forbes was sharing about her 20-year journey through the dense fog of depression? Last week, Reverend Shannon gave us such a beautiful talk about the metaphysical meaning of Easter, that 3-day event where resurrection taught us that the things of this world come and they come to pass, and we are here to triumph over them. In fact, we are here to roll away the things that are blocking us from our good. We are boulder movers. I loved that last week, right? So whatever that boulder is in your life, whatever that thing is, whether you're in a hard time, coming out of a hard time, or just living your life, here's the thing. If you're in that place, if you're in it, whether it's a 3-day event, a 7-year event, or a 20-year event, or something in between, here's the invitation. The invitation is to surrender. It's going to take the time that it takes. And ignoring it or trying to push through, that was mine. That was my toxic trait for those 7 years. I just kept pushing through. I'm going to just push through, right? So however time it takes is what it's going to take. Michael J. Fox, the actor and the amazing advocate for finding a cure for Parkinson's disease, he said, acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is, and there's got to be a way through it. Surrender doesn't mean that we sit around and we're like, oh, well, okay, I guess this is it. Woe is me. Woe. That's not what surrender means. It's accepting what is and moving through it. Acceptance is a spiritual practice because it invites us to see through those clouds of fear and grief and depression. It allows us to see through the clouds of our condition to the truth that is beyond the condition, that there is an infinite love that is everywhere present, and that means that it is with you and unfolding a feet before your path. No, unfolding a path before your feet. Okay, I'm just going to be completely honest. I just got back from a 3-day drama competition with a bunch of high schoolers, and I haven't slept much in 3 days. And they were so brave, y'all. When I was 15, 16, 17 years old, I couldn't stand in front of a packed theater and act before my peers. They were so brave. They sang. Their bravery was so inspiring to me, and their ability to just walk it. And I'm a little brain mushy today. I want to talk for just a minute about what happens when we're coming out of one of these times, because these times come and they come to pass, right? We're not all in one of those times right now, but many, if not most of us, have been through some of those times, Even as a child, going through things with friends on the playground, it felt just as big it was just as important an experience, right? So as we're starting to come out of these experiences, for me, it was 7 years before I realized that I was grieving. I didn't even know that's what it was happening. It was 7 years before I realized I was grieving. And then I just suddenly came to myself one day. And I was, Rev Masando calls it doom scrolling. I was on Facebook and I was just doing the thing, da-da-da-da-da. And I saw this. I am rebraving after a difficult stage that unbraved me. And I just cried because I realized that's what was happening. I was rebraving after a difficult stage that had unbraved me. And I knew that I was rebraving because of this. When we first got the diagnosis, the doctors, some of you will be able to relate to this. The doctors were like, for the love, do not go home and Google this. Your experience is your experience, and you don't need the Google telling you what's going to happen. So, of course, what do? Note to self, go home and Google the thing. They said, whatever you do not Google the thing. But do go and find, there are amazing support groups out there. Go jump into some support groups so that you have people who are going through the same experience as you, and you can share resources and hope and grief together, right? And Isolator Shelley said, no thanks. I'm good. Because there was a wisdom in me that knew that I could not carry my own experience and be open in any other way to other mommies' experiences that were going through the same thing I was going through. I wasn't ready for that yet. And how I knew that I was rebraving is that I suddenly found myself joining these groups and being a contributing voice and being able to hold space for other people who were going through the same thing I was going through. And I knew that I was rebraving, right? And as I started to do that work and I started to, I started to come out of myself a little bit. I started teaching again. I started taking care of myself again. I started just living life again, and I found so much wisdom and solace and hope. And as I have experienced this rebraving and I have opened my eyes, I have recognized that we are all so brave. Those of you who raise your hand that you're going through a thing, you are so brave to walk in these doors and look for hope and comfort in a community that loves you. That is bravery. Those of you who are coming out of a thing, it is so brave of you to open your eyes and recognize that life is different now. No matter what your thing was, life is different now than it was before. And it takes a lot of courage and bravery to walk a new path. God bless you. And for those of you who are not brave again, you know what? I love you. I wasn't brave for 7 years, and you all held me. And so here's our agreement. We will be brave for you until you can be brave for yourself. That's what community does. But it's not just me, and it's not just us that are rebraving. We are rebraving. We're rebraving in Tennessee. We are rebraving in Texas. We are rebraving everywhere in this country where people are standing up for their neighbor who looks differently, loves differently, and lives differently from them. Every person who is standing up for truth and love and kindness is rebraving this country. We are braving again together, my friends. So all of us, thank you. So we're all rebraving. So one of my rebraving I mentioned before is that I've joined some of these groups, and there's so much wisdom in them. And this week, I was in one of those groups, and I was reading an article about something called emotional dysregulation. So emotional dysregulation is when something happens, you're provoked by something, and you are incapable in that moment of regulating your emotional response to it. This happens in kids with muscular dystrophy because there's an enzyme that muscles emit when they break down that can fog up their brain, and it can make them emotionally dysregulate. It happens in neurodivergent people for different reasons. It happens to every single one of us. If you're feeling brave, raise your hand if you have ever had a moment where you couldn't control your emotions, right? It happens to every single one of us. And so I was fascinated as I was reading this article this week because I came across this. It was written by a woman named Heather Benbrook, who is a licensed social worker. And she said, our eye position, where we're looking, is directly correlated to the part of the brain that we are engaging. For example, when we look down, go ahead and look down, our amygdala, an emotional brain, is engaged and stimulated. When we look straight ahead, our brain is connected to our auditory processing. Our eyes connect us to our auditory processing when we're looking straight ahead, and we can listen, right? But when we look up, oh, that's a bright light. When we look up, our prefrontal cortex is engaged and active, which allows us to engage our rational thoughts and process through our emotions. So, I've heard some of you mention that you're very logical and it's hard for you to connect with your emotional body. Try just looking down for a moment. Focus your eyes down and ask yourself, how am I feeling? Guess what? There is nothing wrong with your amygdala. I feel like it gets a bad rap. Your amygdala is super important, y'all. It's where we house fight, flight, or fawn, freeze, the F words are all in the amygdala, and they're important. It's what, when a car's coming at you, what makes you get out of the way. Bless it, it's hard. Give it some love. But if you are a person who struggles with connecting with your emotions, very simply look down and check in. Notice what your emotion is, right? And then look up. I think it's no accident that we meditate like this, right? We're connected with our auditory processing. We can listen to divine love in the silence, and we're open and vulnerable, right? But when we look up, that part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, it houses reasoning, problem solving, comprehension, impulse control, creativity, and perseverance. We engage that part of us that can get creative about our life when we look up. Isn't that fascinating? I thought it was fascinating. When I was reading about that and thinking about that this week, I remembered this verse from the Hebrew Bible. The psalmist said, I will lift up mine eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help. When I was a child, I didn't realize that was two sentences. I heard that like this: I will lift up mine eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help. And I thought, my God, how lovely. All I have to do is lift up my consciousness and know that help is coming to me, right? There's a lot of good in that. But that's not what it says, is it? It says, I will lift up mine eyes to the hills. From whence cometh my help? And what is that saying? It's saying I am lifting my eyes and I am raising my consciousness to the place that houses problem solving, visionary thinking, right? And I'm simply saying, where's the help? How good it is to be able to ask for help, my darlings. How good it is to stand and be open and present and accepting and asking for help It's so, so important. So this verse carries with it two invitations for us today. First of all, if you're in the gunk, I invite you to stop, right? It's okay to drop in and feel what you're feeling, because there's a lot of clues in that. Feel what you're feeling, and look up and take a breath. And engage that part of your brain that wants to help you solve the problem. Okay? We accept it, but then we open ourselves to the path that will move us through it. So that's the first invitation of that beautiful verse from Psalms. The second invitation is simply to engage, to lift up your consciousness, metaphorically and literally, to lift up and engage with divine wisdom. That divine intelligence that has been guarding and directing you all along. Because here's the thing, your higher wisdom self knows. It knows. It knows you. It knows your capabilities. It knows your contracts. It knows your fears. It knows your scars. It knows everything. And it also knows the path through. It knows your purpose. And the knowledge that our higher wisdom self contains, it comes without any of the baggage of our story. It's divine guidance. And so the invitation is for you to invite this higher wisdom to work in you, to work in your life, to work through you as divine love. Call it spirit, call it God, call it Fred. I do not care what you call it. Some people do name their higher wisdom self and create a relationship with it. I think it's lovely. But whatever you call it, just look up. Just look up. You can do that through prayer on your own or with one of our very talented and skilled prayer practitioners. You can do it by simply getting quiet and get calm and centered. Notice your feelings and then move past them. Get to a calm and centered place and simply send out like a pulse into the universe. What help is coming my way? And then watch. Watch for the good. Watch for the messages. Watch for the helpers, as Fred Rogers said, right? You can also do it. Imagine this. Go for a walk. Go for a walk. It doesn't matter where. It can be the woods, or it can be, we walked all over downtown Salem over the last 3 days. It doesn't matter where you're walking. Find the beauty. Find the good. Just notice it. And as you're on your way home, as you open your door, you could simply say, show me more good, right? And invite the seeing of it into your consciousness and watch the good just unfold like a path before your feet. This is how it works. But we have to be awake and aware and alive to the good. That's our responsibility. Divine wisdom's responsibility is to open the path. Okay? Thank you so much for playing with me today. I want you to know one more thing. Your highest wisdom self knows you, loves you, and is closer than your breath and nearer than your heartbeat. And here's the thing. You're not alone as you are braving again. We're never alone.
Hi, friends. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this message supported you. We are a nonprofit, and we do all of this based solely on the gifts that you give. No amount is too small or too large. You can text to give. You can go online and check out our website. We're doing so much. You can give that way. Thank you so much for being here, for being a part of this community, and for supporting this message of bringing more light, more love, and spirit-led social action out into the world. Thank you. You're loved. So loved.